On a cold, quiet night, Evan thought he'd simply rescued a half-frozen puppy from the roadside. But by the next morning, before he could even open his eyes fully, engines roared outside and red-blue lights flooded his tiny home. Police, unmarked SUVs, and men he'd never seen before stood at his door, staring as if they weren't here for him at all, but for the little dog he was holding. The last of the daylight had already bled out over Sierra Landing when Evan Miller finally headed home. His old pickup hummed along the lake road, headlights brushing reeds and weathered docks. The town behind him was a string of tired porch lights and dark storefronts, the kind of place where nothing surprising was ever supposed to happen. He rubbed the back of his neck, still sore from spending all day crouched in a stranger's attic fixing fried wiring. The radio murmured a country song through static, and for a little while the night felt simple. Just cold air, cracked pavement, and the distant glimmer of water beside him. Evan told himself that tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that. Up ahead, red and blue lights suddenly flared across the road. Evan slowed, squinting as a patrol car, an ambulance, and a tow truck clogged the narrow stretch by the cliff. A deputy waved him down, breath fogging in the chill. Roads closed. Fender bender turned messy. "Take the Forest Service Road," the man called, jerking his thumb toward a side turn swallowed by trees. Evan hesitated, eyeing the gap in the guardrail where a faded sign for Ridge Trail access leaned askew. He had never liked that cut-through. It twisted into the pines, no houses, no lights, just dirt and memory. But the deputy was already walking away, and traffic was backing up behind him. With a quiet sigh, Evan flicked on his blinker and turned into the dark. The pavement gave way to rough gravel, crunching under the tires as he climbed. Trees crowded in on both sides, branches knitting together overhead, turning his headlights into two narrow tunnels of yellow. The lake disappeared behind the trunks, replaced by shadow and the soft rush of wind through needles. Evan rolled his shoulders, the cab suddenly feeling too small, too quiet. As he rounded a bend, the beam of his light swept across something he had almost forgotten existed. The old ranger station. It sat slumped behind a sagging fence, windows boarded, paint peeled down to gray wood. The government sign out front was cracked in half, one piece lying crooked in the weeds. For a second, he wondered when the last time anyone had parked there was. He eased off the gas, eyes tracking the broken porch, and that was when he heard it. At first he thought it was the radio cutting out, some stray bit of static. Then the sound came again, thin and raw, almost swallowed by the engine's rumble. A high, shaky whimper, the kind that made something in his chest go tight before his brain even caught. Up. Evan pulled over without really deciding to, tires crunching to a stop in the gravel shoulder. He killed the engine, and the silence that followed felt huge, thick with pine and cold. For a heartbeat, he heard nothing but his own breathing. Then there it was, clearer now, a tiny cry from somewhere near the fence line, as if the night itself were hurt. He stepped out into the cold, his work boots sinking into frosted dirt. The air smelled like sap and damp leaves, the kind of smell that clung to flannel and never fully washed out. From the cab, the dome light spilled a weak circle over the road, but beyond that, everything was darkness and suggestion. The whimper came again, softer, desperate. Evan felt it more than heard it. "Hello," he called, immediately feeling foolish for talking to trees. His breath puffed white as he moved toward the leaning fence. The wood was splintered in places, nails rusted into orange stains. He swept the area with the flashlight on his phone, beam shivering slightly in his hand as it passed over weeds, old beer cans, and a tangle of bramble. Then the light caught on something small, huddled in the wedge between two fence posts. For a heartbeat, he thought it was just a crumpled grocery bag, snagged on the wire. But the shape trembled, then lifted its head, and two dark eyes flashed back at him, wet and shining. Mud streaked the tiny muzzle, and every breath came in a visible shudder. It was a puppy. No bigger than his two hands pressed together, fur soaked and clumped with dirt, paws scraped raw from whatever it had stumbled through. Its ears were too heavy for its head. One flopped sideways in a way that would have been funny if it were not shaking so hard. It tried to back away from the light, but hit the fence and froze, trapped between fear and the cold. Evan crouched slowly, denim tightening at his knees. The gravel bit through his work pants as he lowered himself to the puppy's level. "Hey, easy," he murmured, voice dropping without him thinking about it. His fingers ached from the chill, but he extended one hand, palm up, letting the little thing sniff the air between them. The puppy's nose twitched, then pressed weakly against his skin, cold as ice. For a moment he stayed like that, hand out, heart thudding in a way that had nothing to do with the climb up the hill. He glanced around, half expecting someone to step out of the trees and claim it, or a mother dog to appear, bristling. Nothing moved. Just the empty station, the old sign, and the endless dark. The puppy let out one more thin whine and sagged against the post, as if the effort of existing had finally cost too much. The decision settled over him with the same quiet weight as the night. Evan slipped his arms through the gap in the fence, feeling splinters scrape his sleeves, and gently scooped the puppy up. It weighed almost nothing, all bone and shivers, body curling instinctively into the hollow of his chest. He pulled it close, tucking it inside his jacket, feeling the hesitant flutter of its heartbeat against his ribs as he stood. By the time he reached the truck, the puppy had burrowed deeper into his shirt, its tiny paw hooked in his collar like it was afraid he might vanish if it let go. Evan eased into the driver's seat and shut the door, shutting out the wind and the strange loneliness of the ranger station. For a second he just sat there, staring through the windshield at the dark road ahead, one hand resting over the small, trembling life, warming his chest. Then he turned the key, and the engine rumbled back to life, carrying both of them away from the fence and into a night that suddenly felt different. "Jambo?" Evan's house sat on the edge of Sierra Landing like it had given up trying to impress anyone. A narrow one-story with faded siding, a crooked porch light, and a yard that was more dirt than grass. When he pulled into the short driveway, the puppy was still tucked against his chest, a small, steady weight that made the place feel less empty before he even stepped inside. He nudged the front door open with his shoulder and flicked on the light. The living room greeted him with cluttered familiarity. A sagging couch, a coffee table scarred by old coffee rings, coils of extension cord and toolboxes stacked near the wall. It was a space meant for sleeping and killing time between jobs, not for anyone else. The puppy shifted under his jacket, a quiet reminder that anyone else had just arrived. Evan shut the door against the cold and carefully unzipped his jacket. The puppy blinked at the sudden brightness, eyes glossy and wide. For a second it clung to his shirt, claws snagging the fabric like it did not trust the ground. "Easy," he said softly, easing it onto the couch cushion. It stood there, legs wobbling, tiny chest fluttering like a bird trying to slow its wings. He moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets as quietly as a man could in an old house. No dog food, of course. He found a chipped cereal bowl, warmed some milk on the stove until it just started to steam, then cut a slice of bread into small pieces. The whole time he kept glancing back. The puppy watched him, head tilted, not in random curiosity, but as if tracking every move he made. Setting the bowl on the floor, Evan crouched and dipped his fingers in the milk. He held them out, waiting. The puppy hesitated, nose working the air, then shuffled closer and gave a cautious lick. A second later, hunger took over. It began lapping at the milk with measured eagerness, each movement surprisingly neat for something that had been shaking in the dirt an hour earlier. When it was done, a few white drops clung to its whiskers. Evan found himself smiling, reaching for a paper towel. The puppy didn't flinch when he gently wiped its face, just stared up at him with that same steady gaze. There was gratitude there, plain as day, but something else too. something that made him feel like he was being studied instead of just seen. "You picked the wrong ditch, buddy," he murmured. "Or maybe the right one." He carried the puppy to the old armchair by the window, grabbed a folded flannel blanket from the back, and made a little nest on the seat. The fabric was warm from the heater vent nearby. He set the pup down, tucking the edges in like he was wrapping a baby. For a moment, the little body relaxed, eyes drifting shut. The peace lasted all of 30 seconds. The puppy's ears twitched, and it lifted its head, searching. When Evan straightened and took a step away, a thin whine broke out, not loud but sharp enough to stop him. The pup clambered forward clumsily, dragging the blanket with it until one paw reached his boot. It pressed there, tiny toes splayed, as if laying a claim. The knock came just then, rattling the thin door. Evan startled, the puppy stiffening with him. A woman's voice called, slightly muffled. "Evan? Everything okay in there?" Lights came on real late. He exhaled, recognizing the neighbor. "Yeah, just a sec," he answered, scooping the puppy back into the chair. It watched him walk away, eyes dark and unblinking, following every step like a shadow. He opened the door to find Hannah Brooks on the small porch, arms folded against the cold. Her red rescue shelter jacket was zipped to her chin, blonde hair twisted into a messy knot. "Thought you were working out by the marina," she said. "Saw your truck come in late, and I heard something." Her gaze slipped past his shoulder, scanning the room out of habit more than nosiness. A soft sound answered for him, a tiny yip from the armchair. Hannah's brows rose. "Is that what I think it is?" She stepped around him before he could respond, eyes immediately landing on the bundle of blanket and fur. The puppy stared back at her, still as a statue, not the wiggling excitement she was used to from strays. "Well, hey there," she murmured, kneeling beside the chair. She held out her hand, palm down, fingers loose and safe. Most puppies, in her experience, rushed the opportunity. This one didn't. It sniffed once, then slowly leaned back, pressing its side against the cushion while its gaze stayed locked on her face. Not fearful, exactly. Just guarded. Hannah's smile faded a notch. "Where'd you find him?" she asked, glancing up at Evan. When he mentioned the old ranger station, her expression tightened in a way she tried to hide. "That place is 20 minutes into the woods," she said quietly. "No houses, no farm nearby. We've had coyotes out that way for months." She reached up, parting the fur gently at the back of the puppy's neck. Her fingers paused over a faint, straight line of bare skin hidden beneath the coat, like a scar that shouldn't be there. "And this," she added under her breath, "is not from falling off a porch." Evan felt the room shrink a little. He hadn't noticed the mark before, too focused on keeping the little body warm and breathing. "Maybe he got caught on a fence," he offered, but it didn't sound convincing even to him. Hannah sat back on her heels, studying the pup with that evaluating look people used on broken things they meant to fix. "Maybe," she said slowly, "but if someone dumped him out there, they didn't want him found." For a long moment, none of them moved. The heater kicked on with a hollow thud, pushing warm air across the room. The puppy shifted again, turning away from Hannah and inching toward Evan's leg. It pressed its head against his shin, paw resting lightly on his boot, as if it had already decided which human belonged to it. The choice felt sudden and heavy, landing on his chest like a weight he hadn't asked for but couldn't set down. Hannah rose, brushing her hands on her jeans. "If you're keeping him for the night, call me in the morning," she said, voice gentler. "If nobody reports a missing pup, we'll figure out next steps. Vet check, maybe scan for a chip. But Evan," she hesitated at the door. "If anyone comes around asking weird questions about a dog, you call me first. Not all lost animals are just lost." When she left, the house felt quieter than before she arrived, the kind of quiet that made a man aware of his own heartbeat. Evan locked the door and leaned his forehead against the wood for a second, listening to the hum of the heater, the faint tick of cooling metal in the pipes. Behind him, the puppy gave a soft, almost impatient sound, and he turned. It was still watching him from the chair, eyes steady, as if waiting for him to take his proper place in the room. Charlit. Morning crept into the house in thin gray streaks, sliding through the blinds and laying quiet bars of light across the living room. Evan woke to the faint tick of the heater and the surprising warmth pressed against his ribs. The puppy had somehow wriggled out of the flannel nest and curled itself right against him during the night, tucked into the hollow of his chest like it had always belonged there. For a few seconds he lay still, listening to its tiny breaths. They were steady now, not the ragged gasps from the roadside. One paw rested on his t-shirt, as if to make sure he did not disappear while it slept. When he shifted, the little body stirred, lifting its head. Sleep clung to its eyes, but the moment it recognized him, its tail thumped weakly against his arm. "Morning trouble?" he murmured. He eased himself up, cradling the puppy in his hands. It blinked at the room as if taking inventory. The sagging couch, the chipped coffee table, the tangle of orange extension cord coiled near the wall. Then its gaze came back to his face, sharp and focused, and for a fleeting heartbeat, he felt like the one under observation. He carried it to the kitchen, bare feet chilly against the worn linoleum. While the coffee maker sputtered to life, he poured a small saucer of milk, breaking a piece of bread into even smaller bits this time. The puppy watched every move from his arm, head turning with each motion in a way that looked almost calculated. When he set the saucer down, it went to work, eating neatly, barely spilling a drop. Somewhere outside, a truck door slammed. Evan barely noticed, too busy wiping milk from the puppy's chin with a paper towel. It accepted the attention calmly, then nudged his wrist with its nose, pushing his hand back toward its head. The gesture was subtle, almost like a request. He chuckled under his breath and obliged, scratching gently behind one soft ear until its eyes slid half shut. The second slam was louder, followed by a muffled voice carried on the cold air. Evan's hand stilled. The puppy's eyes snapped fully open, its ears tipped forward, body going suddenly still in his palm. The sound of an engine idling drifted through the thin walls, joined by another, deeper rumble. Tires on gravel. Doors opening in quick succession. The kind of sounds that did not belong on his quiet little street at 8 in the morning. He frowned and set the puppy down on the floor. It didn't toddle off like a normal pup, didn't nose around the baseboards or chase imaginary ghosts. Instead, it walked straight to the front door and sat, body low, ears pointed toward the crack at the bottom, like a small soldier at attention. A low vibration started in its chest, not quite a growl, more like a warning the throat hadn't decided to voice yet. Evan crossed the living room, heart picking up for no sensible reason. As he reached the window, a sharp knock rattled the door, followed by a shout, clear and practiced. "Mr. Miller, Sierra Landing Police. We need you to open the door, sir." The puppy flinched at the volume, then shifted closer to the door, planting itself between the sound and the rest of the room. He pulled the curtain back a sliver and felt his stomach drop. The street outside, usually occupied by 1 or 2 parked cars and Mr. Lambert's ancient lawn chair, was filled. A marked patrol car sat at the curb, lights spinning without the siren. Behind it, 2 dark SUVs idled, their windows tinted too black for a small town. Officers in jackets marked police stood on his walkway, hands resting near their holsters. At the edge of the group, a man in a plain dark coat and another in a suit watched the house without moving. They did not look like local cops. They did not look like they belonged on his scruffy little block at all. Even from behind the glass, Evan could see something in their faces that wasn't curiosity. It was calculation, like they had come here already knowing what they expected to find. The knock came again, harder this time. "Mr. Miller, this is Chief Nolan. We just have a few questions about last night by the old ranger station." The familiar name did nothing to slow the jump of Evan's pulse. The puppy's low sound finally broke into an actual growl, deep for such a small body. Its fur lifted in a thin ridge along its spine as it glanced back at Evan, then returned its gaze to the door. He swallowed, forced his shoulders down, and unlatched the deadbolt. The puppy shifted sideways, staying in front of him even as the door opened a few inches. Cold air rushed in, along with the sharp smell of exhaust and wet pavement. Chief Nolan stood on the porch, hat pulled low, lines of fatigue dug around his eyes. Two uniformed officers flanked the steps, and beyond them, the men in plain clothes stood like shadows. "Morning, Chief," Evan managed. His voice came out rough, as if he'd been the one barking. Nolan's gaze flicked past him, into the house, sliding over the coils of cord, the couch, then dropping down to the puppy at his feet. For a split second, something unreadable crossed the man's face. The pup's growl quieted, but it did not retreat. It simply stared back, eyes much too steady for a creature rescued from a ditch 12 hours ago. "We're following up on an incident near the ridge trail," Nolan said, keeping his tone even. "Your truck was seen heading past the barricade last night. Mind telling me where you were exactly?" The question was casual on its surface, but the extra cars, the outsiders, the way Nolan's shoulders were just a little too stiff, told a different story. This was not a friendly check-in. Evan answered, heart thudding. He mentioned taking the forest road, the detour, the dark, leaving out only the part where the night had handed him a life to carry home. The puppy pressed one paw against his boot again, the way it had done with his shirt, as if anchoring him. From the sidewalk, one of the suited men shifted, whispering something into the sleeve of his jacket. Nolan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look back at them. "Did you see anyone else near the old ranger station?" the chief asked. "Any vehicles? Anyone on foot? Any animals?" The pause before that last word was small but sharp as a paper cut. Evan's mouth went dry. He thought of Hannah's warning. Not all lost animals are just lost. The puppy's claws flexed lightly against his shoe, as if feeling the shift in him. "No people," he said slowly. "Just the station." It was quiet. He hesitated, then added, "Found a pup tangled by the fence. Figured somebody dumped him out there. Brought him home so he wouldn't freeze." The truth, stripped down to its simplest bones. Nolan glanced down again. The puppy did not look away this time. Its eyes caught the weak light, and for the briefest heartbeat, seemed to hold it. Behind Nolan, the man in the coat took a small step forward, attention sharpening on that tiny patch of fur and bone at Evan's doorstep. "We've had reports of wildlife out of place," he said, voice smooth, not bothering to introduce himself. "If you wouldn't mind, we might need to have that dog looked at, for public safety." There was something in the way he said that dog that made the phrase feel like a label, not a living thing. The air between them tightened. For a moment, the whole world shrank to the width of the open doorway. Evan's bare feet on the worn floorboards, the puppy's paw on his boot, the chief's hat brim dripping with a slow fall of melted frost. Somewhere down the street, a screen door creaked as Mr. Lambert stepped outside, blinking at the scene with wide, curious eyes. Sierra Landing was watching now, even if only through aging windows and twitching curtains. Evan drew a breath he hadn't realized he needed. "He's not going anywhere this morning," he said quietly. "He's barely standing as it is. You want a vet to check him? We can set something up. But you're not taking him out of here like evidence." It wasn't a challenge, not quite. More like a line he had discovered under his own feet while they talked. The puppy's grip on his boot eased, then settled, as if it approved. Nolan studied him for a long moment, something softer than suspicion flickering in his eyes. He knew Evan, knew the odd jobs, the storm repairs he'd done for the town when no one else could. Slowly, the chief nodded. "We'll arrange an appointment at Dr. Hale's," he said. "Today, you bring the dog in yourself. And Evan, if you notice anything unusual, anything at all, you call us before you tell anyone else." His gaze slid briefly toward the men behind him. The officers stepped back, the knot of bodies at the foot of the steps loosening. Engines revved as the SUVs pulled away first, swallowing their secrets behind dark glass. The patrol car followed, lights clicking off as it turned the corner. In a matter of minutes, the street looked almost normal again. Only the tracks in the gravel and Mr. Lambert's stunned stare from his porch said otherwise. Evan closed the door gently, the latch sounding much too loud in the quiet house. He leaned his forehead against the wood for a moment, then looked down. The puppy had already turned away from the door, padding back toward the living room with a deliberate, unhurried gait. At the edge of the rug it stopped, looked back at him, and gave one small wag of its tail, as if to say that whatever storm had just touched their front step, it had chosen its side already. The rest of the morning tried to pretend it was normal. After the cars rolled away and Chief Nolan's warning faded into silence, Evan turned off the coffee maker that had burned his pot to bitterness and opened the window a crack. Cool air drifted in, carrying the faint smell of pine and lake water. On the rug by the couch, the puppy sat like a tiny sentry, eyes tracking him with quiet intent. He moved slowly, almost testing the room. The pup followed each step with its gaze, head turning with a smoothness that felt too controlled for wobbly legs. When he bent to pick up an extension cord, it shifted its weight forward. When he straightened, it eased back. Evan told. Himself, he was imagining patterns in puppy behavior. Still, the awareness in those dark eyes pressed against the back of his thoughts. He busied himself with dishes, letting the warm water run longer than usual. Behind him, he heard the soft patter of paws on linoleum. The puppy joined him in the kitchen, not nosing in the trash or batting at shadows like he expected, but sitting near his heel, watching the sink, the faucet, his hands. Whenever he glanced down, it glanced up, as if checking they were still in the same moment together. When he finished, he tugged a battered notepad from the counter, intending to jot down a grocery list. No dog food on the shelves meant no excuse not to fix that. He uncapped a pen, then dropped it. The pen bounced off the pad, rolled in a neat arc off the table, and disappeared beneath the low cabinet. Evan sighed, bracing his palm on the edge as he leaned down and peered into the dust-dark gap. The space was too tight for his hand, too shallow for his shoulder. He could see the pen just out of reach, glinting like the universe was laughing at him. Before he could fetch a hanger to hook it, the puppy moved. Without hesitation, it padded over, crouched, and slid its small body halfway under the cabinet. There was a series of tiny scrapes, a muffled bump, then the pen rolled neatly back out to tap against Evan's boot. He stared for a beat, then let out a disbelieving breath. "Well, that's handy," he said, trying to keep his tone light. The pup backed out, shook dust from its whiskers, and looked up at him, tail giving one measured wag. There was no clumsy pride, no frantic bouncing, just a quiet, almost satisfied look, as if retrieving dropped tools had always been part of its job. Later, while the afternoon sagged into a cloudy gray, he tried to rest on the couch. The puppy climbed up carefully, choosing the spot at his side instead of his chest this time, its back pressed against his ribs. Its breathing fell into rhythm with his, a slow inhale when he did, a soft exhale as his chest fell. Every time he shifted, the pup adjusted, maintaining that line of contact like it was following some invisible rule. A little after 3, the air in the house dipped cooler, a familiar sign of the old heater cycling harder than it should. Evan pushed up with a reluctant sigh and headed for the hall closet where the circuit panel sat. The puppy hopped down and trotted ahead of him, arriving at the door first. It sat, waiting, staring at the handle, then at him, as if it already knew where he was going and why. He opened the panel, checking the switches more out of habit than need. While he worked, the overhead light flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The house fell into a soft gray dimness. In that pocket of near dark, Evan glanced down, something pricking the edge of his awareness. The puppy looked back up at him, and for a brief second, its eyes caught what little light there was and held it in a way that didn't seem possible. It wasn't a bright glow, not like a flashlight. More a low ember, a reflective shimmer deep inside the dark, there and gone so quickly he could have blamed it on nerves. He blinked, reached up, and flipped the main breaker off and back on. The lights stuttered to life, washing the hallway in yellow. When he looked again, the pup's eyes were just eyes, warm, watchful, deceptively ordinary. In the late afternoon, a knock sounded on his front window. 3 short taps, the rhythm familiar. Evan pushed aside the curtain to see Mr. Lambert on his porch, jacket zipped, knit cap pulled low over his ears. The older man gave a little wave, so Evan opened the door, careful with how wide he swung it. The puppy angled itself just behind his leg, peeking out with one eye. "Heard you had quite the welcoming committee this morning," Lambert said without preamble, squinting past Evan's shoulder as if replaying the parade of vehicles. "Didn't see that many cars out here since the 4th of July parade got rained out." His tone was light, but there was a tightness near his mouth that didn't match the joke. He shifted his weight, boots creaking. "Nothing much," Evan replied, knowing how weak that sounded. "Questions about the forest road. You know how they are." Lambert snorted, unconvinced. His gaze dropped, finally catching the small shape pressed to Evan's jeans. "So that's the little hitchhiker everybody's spooked about," he murmured. He bent slightly, not enough to reach out, just enough to meet its eyes. The puppy didn't retreat. It held his look, unflinching, like it was measuring something in the old man. Lambert straightened slowly. "Last night," he said, lowering his voice, "around 2, I saw a dark SUV parked across from your place. No lights, no engine running, just sitting there. Thought maybe I was seeing things until I got up again, and it was gone." He cleared his throat. "These boys this morning? Same feel. Watchful. Not neighborly." The words hung between them heavier than the street's damp air. After he left, the house seemed to listen with Evan. Every passing engine sounded suspect, every shadow outside the window a little too long. The puppy stayed near him as the light faded, never underfoot, never wandering, always half a step away, like a partner used to moving with someone through tight spaces. When he sat at the table to pay bills, it curled by his chair. When he got up to make a sandwich, it padded to the kitchen doorway, positioning itself where it could see both him and the front door. By the time evening settled into true dark, Sierra Landing had gone quiet again. Porch lights clicked on up and down the street, and living rooms filled with the muffled glow of television. Inside Evan's house, the only illumination came from a floor lamp and the soft blue tint of the weather forecast replaying on mute. The puppy lay stretched along his thigh on the couch, one paw resting lightly against his hand. He watched it for a long time, thumb tracing absent circles over its fur. "You're just a dog," he told himself under his breath. "A weird, sharp little dog somebody didn't deserve." The alternative, that the scar on its neck and the glow in its eyes and the men in dark coats were all threads of the same knot, was too big to untangle at the end of a long day. The pup shifted at the sound of his voice, pressing closer until their warmth pooled together in the quiet room. Eventually, the steady hush of the heater and the weight of the day pulled his eyes closed. The last thing he saw was the puppy lifting its head once, scanning the room, ears pricked toward the door as if making sure the world outside would behave until morning. Only when it seemed satisfied did it lay its head back down, anchoring its tiny body against his side, keeping both their secrets tucked between four thin walls and the hum of an old house that had finally, for the first time in years, stopped feeling empty. By late morning, the sky over Sierra Landing had settled into a flat, pale blue, the kind that promised cold, but not much else. Evan stood in the doorway with the puppy in his arms, jacket zipped to his chin, keys biting into his palm. The little body rested easily against him, head tucked under his chin, as if this had always been their routine. It hardly weighed anything, but the responsibility felt heavier than his tool bag. Hannah pulled up out front in her aging Subaru, shelter logo fading on the doors. She stepped out, smoothing her hair under a knit beanie, eyes going straight to the bundle in his arms. "You ready?" she asked, voice low. "Hale's expecting us." Nolan called ahead, said it was a courtesy check. The way she shaped the words made it clear she did not trust the courtesy part at all. In the car, the heater wheezed warm air over their knees as they wound through town. The puppy lay across Evan's lap, paws neatly together, watching the world through the window. It did not pant or wiggle, like most dogs on their first ride. Its gaze moved from passing mailboxes to oncoming cars, to Hannah's hands on the wheel, as if cataloging every sound and motion. They passed the lake, then the grocery store, then the one-stop hardware and feed shop. At the edge of town, the buildings thinned until only a low brick office remained, sitting alone behind a gravel lot. Hale Veterinary Clinic in peeling green letters. A rusty wind chime clinked softly on the porch as Hannah parked. "He's good," she said. "Bit gruff, but he cares more than he admits." Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant and dog shampoo. Faded posters warned about ticks and heartworm. A golden retriever thumped its tail half-heartedly near a teenage boy. A cat in a carrier glared from beneath a towel. Evan took a seat in the corner, the puppy on his lap. The big retriever gave one friendly wag toward them, then faltered, head lowering, ears flattening as the pup's eyes met its. The change was small but strange. The retriever turned its head away, suddenly restless, nudging its boy's hand for a quick exit. "We'll wait outside," the kid muttered, as if nothing had happened. The bell over the door jingled when they left. Evan felt the hair on his arms stir. He looked down. The puppy had not moved. It was simply watching the door, silent, like it had just finished a test no one else knew it was taking. A door at the back swung open, and a man in a worn lab coat stepped through, wiping his hands on a towel. Dr. Marcus Hale had salt and pepper hair and a face that would have looked kindly if not for the permanent crease between his brows. "Evan Miller?" he asked. "Chief said you'd be bringing in a little stray causing a big fuss." His eyes crinkled at the corners, but there was a measuring look behind the joke. They followed him into the exam room, bright with overhead lights and metal trays. Evan set the puppy gently on the stainless steel table. Its paws spread slightly, adjusting to the slick surface, but it did not scramble or shake. It stood steady, watching Hale with the same quiet attention it had given everyone else. The doctor's movement slowed as he noticed. "Let's see what we've got here," Hale murmured. He started with normal things, checking ears, teeth, eyes. He paused at the faint scar on the back of the neck, fingers resting there a heartbeat longer than necessary. His brow deepened. He slipped a stethoscope into his ears and pressed the bell to the tiny chest. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. Hale listened, moved the scope, listened again. His mouth thinned into a line. "Heart strong," he said, but there was something in his tone that didn't fit the word. "Very strong for a pup this size." He tested the joints, flexing each leg, fingertips pressing into muscle. "You said you found him by the old ranger station?" When Evan nodded, Hale shot a quick glance at Hannah. "That's a long way for a little guy to wander alone." He turned to a counter, picking up a sleek handheld scanner. "We'll see if somebody chipped him," he said. "Wouldn't be the first time a breeder dumped a litter and hoped nature handled the paperwork." He passed the device slowly over the pup's shoulders and neck. A soft beep chirped, the screen flickering with a string of numbers. Then the display glitched, went blank, and came back showing no data. Hale stilled. For a moment, his whole body seemed to tighten, then he reset the scanner and tried again. The same pattern, a flash of code, then erasure, like something was actively wiping itself clean. "That's not right," he murmured, more to himself than to them. He set the scanner down carefully, as if it might bite. When he looked back at the puppy, his eyes had lost their easy humor. "I used to do some consulting work," he said slowly, "for a lab that partnered with certain agencies. They like to hide things deep, mark them without being obvious. Half the battle was making sure, if something got loose, it could still be tracked." He nodded toward the scar. "That's not a fence scrape, Evan. Somebody did something deliberate there." The words landed hard in the cramped room. Evan's hand drifted automatically to the pup's back, fingers brushing the fur between its shoulders. The little dog turned its head, nudged his wrist once, then looked back at Hale with that same calm, unblinking stare. It did not seem afraid. If anything, it seemed like it was waiting for him to understand something he couldn't quite see. Hannah crossed her arms, voice low. "Are you saying this isn't just a dumped dog?" Hale held her gaze for a long beat. "I'm saying this animal doesn't move, doesn't respond, like a stray. Reflexes are high, muscle tone is off the charts, heart like a little engine. And whatever chip was there doesn't want to be read anymore?" He hesitated. "You ever heard the name Bioresponse Division?" Evan shook his head. "You have now," Hale said quietly. Before Evan could ask what that meant, the door to the clinic opened out front. Voices drifted down the hall, deeper, more clipped than the usual chatter. The receptionist said something polite, her tone turning uncertain. A second later, a different voice responded, smooth, official, carrying just fine through the thin walls. "We're here about an animal brought in today from Sierra Landing. We were told you'd cooperate." Hale's jaw clenched. He moved to the small window that looked into the waiting area and lifted the corner of the blind with one finger. His shoulders dropped a fraction as he exhaled. "They don't waste time," he muttered. Turning back, he lowered his voice. "You need to take that dog and walk out the back door. Now. Don't stop to argue with me. Don't talk to anyone you don't know." Evan's heartbeat roared in his ears. "Who are they?" he asked. Hannah was already reaching for the puppy, but it resisted, stepping toward Evan instead. Hale's gaze flicked to the door as footsteps entered the hall. "People who will never see this as a pet," he said. "They'll see a project that got loose and a problem to be fixed. You can put him on a metal table and hand him over, or you can leave. Decide fast." The hall handle rattled as someone tried it. Hale stepped forward, blocking the exam room door with his body. "1 minute," he called, slipping an easy tone into his voice. "Finishing up in here." He shot Evan a look that said he had less than that. Hannah pulled the back door open, a slice of cold air rushing in, along with the smell of cut hay from the small field behind the clinic. Evan scooped the puppy up. For a second, he expected it to squirm in panic. Instead, it simply pressed closer to his. Chest, head turning toward the sound in the hallway, ears pricked. Its eyes met his, and something passed between them. trust, or maybe a question. Outside, a car door shut, another piece in a tightening net. "Go," Hale repeated. "I'll stall as long as I can. And Evan, watch who's watching your house." They slipped out into the narrow strip of yard behind the building, the door whispering shut behind them. The chill hit hard after the bright exam lights. Gravel crunched underfoot as they cut along the side of the clinic toward the lot, keeping low, using the dumpster and an overgrown hedge as cover. From the front came the muffled murmur of voices, then the sharper tone of someone used to being obeyed. At the edge of the lot, Hannah paused, scanning. Her Subaru sat where she'd left it. No new cars boxed it in. "Get in," she whispered, already reaching for the handle. Evan settled into the passenger seat, the puppy still against his chest. As the engine turned over and they pulled away, he risked one glance back. A dark sedan had appeared in front of the clinic, men in plain coats standing by the door, sunlight glinting off something clipped to their belts. They drove in silence for several minutes, the tension in the car a third passenger. Only when the clinic disappeared behind a stand of pines did Hannah speak. "Whatever that little guy is," she said, eyes on the road, "he's not just some stray from a backyard. And those people, they're not going to just forget about him." Evan looked down. The puppy had relaxed, head resting over his arm, eyes closed now, as if the exam and the exit had been nothing more than a long, strange game. He let his hand settle on its back, feeling the small, steady thump of its heart. The world outside the window rolled by in a blur of trees and telephone poles, but inside the car a strange calm settled over him. He didn't know what Bioresponse Division was or why they cared so much. He only knew that this little creature had been left to die in the cold and had still chosen to curl up against his chest even when men with badges came knocking. For now, that choice was enough. By the time they pulled back into Evan's driveway, the sun was sliding low, washing Sierra Landing in that tired gold that made everything look older. The day at Hale's clinic felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Evan carried the puppy inside, one arm around its small body, the other closing the door with more care than usual, as if gentleness might keep the world from knocking again. The house greeted them with its familiar clutter, but it did not feel the same. Evan set the pup down on the rug and stood for a moment, listening. No cars idled outside, no voices drifted through the thin walls. Still, a prickle ran along his neck. The puppy moved slowly through the room, nose skimming the floor, then the air, tracing a path only it understood, like it was checking that everything was where they had left it. He tried to force routine back into place. He put coffee on, straightened a stack of bills, ran a hand over the circuit panel just to make sure the last flicker had been a fluke, not another problem. While he worked, the puppy kept a quiet perimeter, pacing the edge of each doorway before settling halfway between him and the front door, eyes never fully at rest. As dusk deepened, the street outside softened into a line of porch lights and drawn curtains. Hannah texted once, asking if they got home all right. He answered with a simple, "Yeah, thanks." A second later, she sent back, "Keep your curtains closed tonight." No emoji, no joke to take the edge off. He read it twice, then let the phone face down on the table. He heated a small pan of chicken broth, let bits of meat cool in a dish, and set it on the kitchen floor. The puppy ate with its usual neat focus, each bite measured. Evan leaned against the counter, watching the rise and fall of its narrow shoulders. When it finished, it didn't wander off. It sat back on its haunches and looked up at him, head tilted, as if waiting for the next move in a game he hadn't realized they were playing. Night came down fully, pressing its weight against the windows. Evan drew the living room curtains tight, clicked the deadbolt, and told himself it was habit, not fear, guiding his hands. He and the pup took their usual place on the couch, news on low in the background. The little dog curled beside him, one paw resting on his forearm, the contact light but constant, like a reminder not to drift too far away. Sometime after 10, the house grew very still. The TV screen went dark. He had shut it off without remembering doing it. Only the lamp by the window stayed on, casting a warm circle around them. Evan's eyes grew heavy. The puppy's breathing was a soft, steady rhythm at his side. For a while, sleep edged close, the kind that finally comes to a man who has been holding his shoulders up all day. Then, faint under the hum of the heater, came another sound. A distant engine, not racing, not slow, just controlled. Tires rolled to a stop on gravel that wasn't his. A car door eased shut instead of slamming. The puppy's head snapped up before Evan even registered it. Its body went from loose to wire-tight, ears pricked toward the back of the house, not the street. Evan straightened, heart thudding. He muted the lamp, leaving just enough light to keep the room from vanishing. The noise came again, closer this time, the slight complaint of wood under weight near the kitchen, where the back steps were. No one used the back door. Friends knocked on the front. Salesmen didn't come at all. The pup slid off the couch in one smooth motion, placing itself between Evan and the kitchen doorway. The back doorknob rattled once, softly, like someone testing it. Then a thin metallic scrape whispered through the house. Tool on metal, deliberate and patient. The deadbolt gave a faint click. That felt louder than any gunshot. Evan's mouth went dry. He reached for his phone with numb fingers, but the puppy stepped forward, blocking his path, eyes fixed on the dark rectangle of the kitchen. The door eased open inch by inch, the night outside spilling in as a colder shade of black. A man in a dark jacket and a pulled-down cap slipped through, moving with the loose confidence of someone who had done this before. He didn't glance at the kitchen cabinets or the old appliances. His gaze cut straight toward the living room, toward where he expected something to be. He held no flashlight. In his left hand was a small handheld device, lights winking faintly, beeping soft in a strange rhythm. As he took one step, then another, the beeps grew quicker. "There you are," he muttered under his breath, voice flat. "Should have stayed where we put you." His eyes swept the room, barely slowing on Evan. They locked instead on the small shape between them. The puppy stood absolutely still, ears forward, body low. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The intruder, the air, Evan's pulse. Then a sound rose from the pup's chest, nothing like the soft grumbles Evan had heard before. It was deeper, layered, a rumble that seemed too big for its frame, vibrating the air like distant thunder. The hairs on Evan's arms lifted. The man in the cap actually hesitated. "Easy, BR-07, the stranger said quietly, angling the device toward the dog. The beeping spiked. "We're just going home." He took another step, free hand reaching, fingers spread like he was approaching a skittish animal. The puppy's eyes flashed once, catching the thin light. Something in them hardened. In the next instant, still without a single bark, it moved. It was not a wild scramble. It was a straight, explosive line of motion. 1 second, the pup was 3 feet away. The next, its body struck the man's wrist with a force that knocked the device from his hand. It clattered across the floor, light sputtering. The man swore, stumbling back, his other hand reaching for his belt. Before he could grip whatever sat there, the puppy had pivoted, placing itself between the man and Evan again, growl rising like an engine shifting gears. "Damn it!" the intruder hissed, cradling his bitten wrist. A thin line of blood darkened his sleeve. He glared at the animal, shock flickering under anger. Imprints holding stronger than they said. He lifted his voice just enough for someone outside to hear. "Target's bonded. Repeat, BR-07 is fully imprinted on civilian." Somewhere beyond the doorway, a radio crackled in answer, too muffled to make out words. Evan found his voice in a rush of fear. "Get out of my house," he said, the words rough, more plea than command. His free hand groped for the lamp cord. The puppy didn't wait. It stepped forward again, each movement precise, not lunging wildly, but adjusting its position, cutting off the man's angle toward the key, living room. Its tail was level, its eyes locked on the intruder's center, tracking every twitch. For a moment, the man seemed ready to test his luck against the small barrier. Then he looked into those eyes and reconsidered. "We'll be back with a proper team," he muttered, backing toward the kitchen. "You can't hide a government asset in a rental." He kicked the drop device toward the door, scooped it up, and vanished into the darkness as quietly as he had arrived. The back door whispered shut, the latch clicking in a way Evan would never again mistake for harmless. Silence pooled behind him. Evan stood rooted, chest heaving, phone still forgotten, in his hand. The puppy remained facing the door for several seconds more, every line of its body listening. Slowly, the ridge of fur along its back settled. The growl faded into a low huff. It turned then and trotted back to Evan, leaping lightly onto the couch as if nothing at all had happened, like they had only heard a branch scrape the siding. It touched his wrist with its nose, then its paw, that same small gesture it used when asking him to stay close. Evan sank down beside it, legs going weak. His hand shook when he reached to stroke its back. The pup leaned into the touch, eyes soft again, no ember light, no battle focus, just quiet presence. Somewhere outside, an engine started, then faded down the street. For a long time they sat like that, man and dog, listening to the house breathe. The danger had slipped away into the dark, but the shape of it remained, burned into the room. Evan knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that this night had drawn a line between before and after. He also knew that whatever the men in dark coats called it, BR-07, an asset, a project, this little creature had chosen, in the moment it counted, to stand in front of him instead of walk through that open door. Morning came slow, like it was unsure about crossing the street. A pale light seeped through the blinds, barely cutting the gray that settled over Evan's living room. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the back door easing open, the stranger's wrist, the way the puppy had moved like something trained, not born. Still, the little dog slept now, curled against his side, warm and strangely peaceful. For a few blessed minutes, the house was quiet. The heater sighed, pipes clicked, and outside, someone's old truck coughed to life down the block. The puppy stirred when Evan shifted, stretching one hind leg, then tucking its nose against his arm. Its breathing stayed steady. Whatever it had done in the dark had left no mark on its calm now. Evan let his hand rest along its back, feeling the small rise and fall. He was just starting to think maybe the day would pass in slow, ordinary pieces when a different sound cut through the morning. Tires on gravel, more than one set. Doors opening in quick, practiced succession. Voices outside, low and clipped. The kind of sounds the street never heard this early. The puppy's head lifted before Evan even sat up. Its ears pricked forward, body tightening like a line pulled taut. A moment later, the first flash of red and blue lights washed through the thin curtains. Then another set, farther back, strobing against the walls of the narrow hallway. Evan's stomach dropped. This was not one patrol car and an apology. Engines idled in a layer, a steady growl that filled the small house. The puppy slid off the couch and walked to the front door, planting itself squarely in front of it, tail still, shoulders squared. Knuckles hit the wood, not a polite knock this time, but a firm official pounding backed by authority. "Mr. Miller, this is Sierra Landing Police. We need you to open the door." The voice was amplified, coming from just outside and from a bullhorn farther back. A second voice carried over the first, crisp and even. "Evan Miller, this is Agent Cole with Federal Bio Response. We're here for the animal unit in your home." For a heartbeat, Evan stayed frozen where he stood. The puppy glanced back at him once, as if to check that he'd heard what it had. Its eyes were clear, no glow, no strange shimmer, just that same steady focus. Then it turned back to the door, lowering itself slightly, weight spread. Like it already understood, a line had been drawn on the other side of the threshold. He moved to the front window and, handshaking, pulled the curtain aside an inch. The view hit him like a shove. A marked patrol car sat at the curb, lights spinning. Behind it, 2 dark SUVs, their windows blacked out. Further back, a large van with unfamiliar markings idled, cables visible inside when the door slid open for a moment. Uniformed officers ringed his front yard, but the men standing in the middle wore heavier vests and carried themselves like they belonged to a different world. Chief Nolan stood on the walkway, hat pulled low, shoulders braced. To his right was a man in a dark coat with a clipped badge on his belt. Agent Cole, no doubt. Beside them, a younger officer Evan recognized, Jamie Torres, shifted his weight, eyes moving from the house to the street, taking in the watching curtains. This wasn't a quiet visit anymore. This was a show. The knock came again, tempered now, but no less insistent. "Evan," Nolan called, voice more personal without the title. "We don't want any trouble here. Open the door so we can talk." Behind him, Agent Cole watched the house like he was examining a file, not a home. In his hand, he held a tablet, thin and dark, something similar to what the intruder had dropped, only newer, sharper. Evan's throat felt dry, but he reached for the deadbolt. The puppy pressed closer to the door, shoulder touching the wood. He eased it back with his foot, gently, and cracked the door open. Cold air poured in, carrying exhaust and the faint smell of damp leaves. Nolan's gaze lifted immediately, sweeping, over Evan's tired face, then dropping to the small shape at his feet. The pup held his stare, unblinking. "We had an incident last night," Agent Cole said before Nolan could speak, his tone precise, every syllable controlled. "One of our recovery officers reported contact with a classified bioresponse unit at this address. He also reported interference by a civilian." His eyes flickered toward Evan in a way that labeled him without using the word. "You understand the gravity of that, Mr. Miller?" Evan felt the puppy's paw find his shoe again, that light touch, calming and urgent all at once. "Somebody broke into my house," he replied, voice low. "Came through my back door in the middle of the night. My dog defended me. That's what happened." Saying "my dog" out loud surprised him with its own truth. The words settled between his ribs like something that had been waiting for a place to land. Chief Nolan's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened just a fraction. He knew about home invasions, about lines that shouldn't be crossed. Agent Cole's expression didn't change. "That dog is a federal asset designated BR-07, he said. "It contains proprietary modifications and data we are responsible for containing. It was never meant for public custody. You are in possession of something you have no legal right to keep." The phrase "legal right" might as well have been a lever. Evan felt anger rise past his fear, slow but solid. The puppy moved a half-step forward, enough that its chest brushed the edge of the doorframe. Its body was relaxed, but every part of it faced out, not in. "With all due respect," Evan said, choosing the words carefully, "I found him half frozen by a fence. No tag, no one looking. Whatever you meant for him, somebody left him to die." A murmur rippled through the line of uniforms behind Nolan. People in small towns understood abandonment more than they understood classified programs. Jamie's gaze flicked to the pup, then back to Evan, something like sympathy passing through his young face. Nolan cleared his throat. "Evan, they have jurisdiction here," he said quietly. "At least on paper. Let's not turn this into a standoff on your front porch." Agent Cole lifted the tablet, tapping something on the screen. A faint ping sounded from inside the house, like a distant microwave or a faulty alarm. The puppy's ears twitched, then flattened for a heartbeat. It looked back over its shoulder as if sensing a tug from a direction only it knew, some old signal trying to wake up. Then it turned again to face the yard, pressing its paw more firmly onto Evan's foot, grounding itself. "You hear that?" Cole asked. "That's the imprint channel. This unit was designed to bond, to follow. It's not a pet, Mr. Miller. It's a tool, and letting it stay here, uncontrolled, in a residential neighborhood, is a risk my department is not going to accept." His tone never rose, but the steel in it left little room for misunderstanding. Behind him, the van door slid open farther. Inside, Evan caught a glimpse of a metal crate bolted to the floor. The thought of that small body in that crate made something in him harden. He looked down. The puppy's eyes were on him now, not the men outside. No glow, no odd reflection. Just a question, quiet and absolute. "Where do we stand?" He blew out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "If you try to drag him out of here," he said, voice thready but steady, "he'll fight you, and I won't stand out of the way." For a second, nobody moved. Even the engine seemed to idle more quietly. Jamie's hand slipped a little farther from his holster. A dog barked 2 yards over, then fell silent. Nolan's shoulders rose and fell with a slow, resigned breath. This was not what he'd hoped for when he put on the badge in a town where most calls were noise complaints and fallen branches. "Agent Cole," the chief said carefully, "you got eyes on the same thing I do. That little dog is bonded. You said yourself that makes retrieval tricky." He let the word hang. "We crowd this porch, scare the neighbors, maybe yank a man and his animal apart in front of half the town, and this turns into something we all answer for. Maybe there's another way to do this." Cole's jaw worked once, the only sign of frustration. His gaze shifted from the pup to the drawn curtains across the street, to Mr. Lambert standing stiffly on his porch, pretending to adjust his satellite dish while watching every move. The agent understood pressure of a different kind, the kind that came from headlines and phone calls from people higher up the ladder. He lowered the tablet a fraction. "We need control," he said finally. "We need access when we deem it necessary. I can offer latitude on location for the moment if we're assured of compliance." His eyes locked with Evan's. "You keep that unit here, contained. You do not parade it around town. And when we say we need tests run, you don't slam any more doors in our face. You agree to that, or we do this my way, right now." The puppy shifted, leaning more of its small weight against Evan's leg. It didn't know the words, but it read tone, tension, the tightness in his body. He thought of the fenced ditch, the scar on its neck, the way it had stepped between him and a stranger without hesitation. He thought of the metal crate in the van. His chest ached with the choice, but the answer was already there, wrapped around his ankles and breathing warm against his skin. "All right," he said quietly. "He stays with me. You want your tests? We talk first. No unannounced midnight visits, no breaking into my house." He paused, letting his own line sink in. "You treat him like an object." I shut the door again. "But I'm not handing him over." It was a small bit of ground, but it was ground he could stand on. Cole looked like a man forced to accept a compromise he would rather have avoided. He nodded once, curt. "We'll be in touch with terms," he said. "And Mr. Miller, if you think about running, remember, there's nowhere you can go that we don't have a map for." With that, he stepped back. Nolan held Evan's gaze a moment longer, a silent apology passing between them, then turned toward the yard, signaling the officers to pull back. Engines revved one by one. The van door slid shut with a hollow thump. The patrol car rolled away first, then the SUVs, their tinted windows swallowing the morning light. Neighbors lingered at their windows until the last set of lights turned the corner and disappeared. The sudden quiet rang in Evan's ears. He closed the door gently, the sound of the latch sealing the house off from the street. Inside, the puppy sat at his feet, looking up at him with that same patient, steady gaze. The tension seemed to melt from its small frame now that the line of uniforms was gone. It lifted one paw and set it on his ankle, not pressing hard, just enough to say it was still there, still choosing the same side. Evan exhaled slowly, sinking back against the door. Whatever he had just agreed to, whatever eyes now watched this little house more closely than ever, one thing had settled firm in his mind. They might call the pup a unit, a project, an asset. But inside these four thin walls, it was something else entirely. It was his. For a while after the standoff, life in Evan's small house settled into a strange kind of ordinary. The patrol cars stopped cruising past quite so slowly. The dark SUVs only appeared every few days, lingering at the corner instead of on his lawn. Inside, though, nothing was ordinary. A little black-furred shadow followed him from room to room, as faithful as any dog and as watchful as any guard. They never did start calling him BR7 inside those walls. The name stayed out there where the files and officers and cold fluorescent lights lived. In here, when Evan needed him, he was just Buddy. The pup seemed to understand the difference. If a government car rolled by, his ears would sharpen, his body go very still. When Evan said his chosen name, the tension eased, and that small tail gave a slow, quiet wag. The first time Agent Cole came back, he did not bring a van. He arrived with Chief Nolan and Officer Jamie, carrying a small black box with a blinking green light. "Remote monitor," he said, setting it on the shelf near the TV. "Vitals, proximity, basic behavioral data. You keep it plugged in. We keep our distance. That's the deal." His tone made it clear he thought Evan had gotten more than he deserved. Buddy sat on the rug, eyes locked on the device as Cole spoke, head tipping to one side, then the other. When the box lit up with a soft beep, the pup rose and walked over, sniffed it once, and then did something that almost made Evan laugh out loud. He turned his back on the B box and leaned his shoulder into Evan's leg instead, choosing his anchor in the most simple way possible. After that, the weeks found a rhythm. Evan went back to work, driving out to fix broken outlets and humming furnaces, always coming home a little quicker than he used to. Every time his truck pulled into the driveway, he could see a small shape in the front window. Buddy would be there, paws on the sill, ears forward, the tip of his tail thumping against the curtains as if the day could finally start now that his person was back. Hannah dropped by more often, always with some excuse. A leftover blanket from the shelter, a bag of better kibble, a question about her faulty smoke detector. She watched Buddy move through the house, the way he anticipated Evan, standing up seconds before he did, the way he never once snapped or lunged without reason. "Whatever they did to him," she said one evening, "they gave him instincts, but you gave him a home." Sometimes, late at night, when the street was quiet and the heater hummed low, Evan would catch Buddy doing something that reminded him of the old warnings. The pup would sit in the doorway, perfectly centered, listening not just to the house, but to something beyond it. His head would tilt, as if hearing a signal from very far away. Then he would turn, walk back, and lay his paw on Evan's arm, as if turning the volume down on whatever called. Every month or so, there was another knock. Not the hard, rattling kind from that first morning, but a measured tap. Cole, or one of his people, would stand on the porch with a tablet and a neutral face, asking calm questions about diet, sleep, behavior. Buddy watched them from his place by the couch, never hiding, never inching closer. When they stepped too far into the room, he would stand and position himself between them and Evan, quietly drawing the line again. Chief Nolan started stopping by alone sometimes, in plain clothes, without a clipboard. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, listening while Evan talked around the parts of the story he couldn't quite share. "You know," Nolan said once, glancing toward the dog stretched under the window, We get trained to see threats, but every time I look at him with you, I just see a partner who picked his side early." Spring slid into Sierra Landing almost without anyone noticing. The snow at the edge of the lake receded, leaving wet stones and new grass. On warmer evenings, Evan sat on the small back step with Buddy at his feet, watching the sky pick up color over the trees. The scar at the pup's neck was nearly hidden by new fur now, but Evan's hand still found it from time to time, thumb resting over the thin line like a silent promise. He never stopped wondering exactly what was buried in the pup's bones, in his blood and brain and quiet, uncanny reactions. Dr. Hale's warnings, the chip that erased itself, the words federal asset, still lived in the back of his mind. But more and more, those thoughts were pushed aside by simpler things. The weight of a sleepy head on his knee, the way Buddy's chest rose and fell in the dark, matching his own. On one particularly clear night, a storm rolled through farther up the ridge, thunder grumbling softly in the distance. At the first low rumble, Buddy lifted his head, eyes bright, body alert. For a moment he looked toward the window, then back at Evan. The old choice presented itself again. Answer some invisible call, or stay. The little dog walked over, climbed clumsily into Evan's lap, and curled there, all decision made. Sitting in the half-light of his small living room, Evan realized that nothing about his days would ever look simple on paper again. There would always be files in some distant office with his name and Buddy's code printed side by side. There would always be eyes that saw the pup as equipment, as data, as something to be measured. But they were not the ones waking up with fur on their pillow and a paw pressed lightly against their chest. He had thought he'd just rescued a lost puppy on a cold road, a simple act of kindness at the end of a long workday. The next morning, when the sirens and badges and drawn guns surrounded his house, he'd learned the world had other plans for that little life. Somewhere between those 2 days, an exhausted man and a trembling dog had chosen each other, and neither force nor fear had undone that choice. In the quiet that followed, as Sierra Landing settled into its familiar small-town rhythm, and the big vehicles stayed mostly away, the unbelievable parts of the story did not vanish. They simply folded themselves into the corners of Evan's life, like old tools on a shelf. What remained in the center was simple enough for anyone to understand. A man, a dog that should not have been his, and a promise made on a freezing night that neither of them had any intention of breaking. Before you head out, drop a quick comment below, even just 0 or 1, so I know you're here with us. And if you'd like more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with the channel. The next one might be the one you remember the most.